It wasn't the insult that broke me, it was the silence. The laughter didn't come from strangers. It came from the front row, my row, where my family sat polished, proud, pretending, and my brother, standing tall under the stage lights, grinning like he owned the auditorium. He held the microphone with that smug confidence he always wore like a tailored suit. He was the guest speaker, the golden son, the firstborn, the varsity everything. And I was the afterthought, the extra chair no one expected to fill. Some people, he said, glancing directly at me with that charming, cruel smirk, try on discipline like it's a costume. But let's be honest, some of us were born for the real thing. Laughter. From teachers. From classmates. From the people who knew me. And my mother didn't flinch. My father didn't blink. They just stared ahead, proud of their perfect son's little joke. Do you know that kind of silence where no one defends you not because they can't, but because they agree? They'd erased me without lifting a finger. We were at the Academic Honors Assembly, senior year. I'd earned a 4.0, a congressional internship recommendation, and a Department of Defense pre-acceptance letter. But none of that mattered. Not in my family, not when my brother had gone to Annapolis, had shaken the hands of admirals, had become their entire narrative. My seat at that ceremony felt colder than the rest, not physically, but like it had been waiting, vacant, meant for someone else, meant for the son they never had again. My name wasn't in the program, even though I was in the top 1% of the graduating class, even though I had been nominated for a National STEM award, even though I had given up every weekend tutoring underclassmen cadets in our ROTC program. My name wasn't printed. I had walked up to the organizer that morning, trying to be calm. Hi. Sorry. I don't see myself listed for the Defense Honors Scholarship. She'd blinked at me like I was bothering her. Maybe it's a mistake on your end, she said. Check with your counselor. My counselor said it must have been a misprint, a clerical thing. Nothing intentional. These things happen. Her voice was soft. Too soft. Like she was afraid I'd break if she acknowledged the truth. But I didn't break. Not then. I smiled. I nodded. And I sat back down. That's the thing about being erased. You learn to sit quietly in rooms you helped build. But even silence has an edge, and mine was getting sharper. That morning, I had ironed my ROTC uniform until it was so crisp it could cut glass. I pinned every ribbon with absolute precision. My boots were mirror-shined. I wore that uniform like armor, not decoration. But when I walked into that auditorium, I felt it the side-eyes, the shrugs, the familiar pull of people deciding who gets to be seen. Did you really need to wear all that my mom had asked in the car? Barely glancing up from her phone. It's just school, she added. It's a federal honors event, I had said softly. She didn't respond. Just tapped at her screen, checking the time. We parked in the far lot. My brother got the reserved space up front, a placard with his name. Capt. Jason Rivers, keynote. Mine said nothing. The hallway leading to the main entrance echoed with dress shoes and chatter. I remember the scent of old floor wax and the sharp, anxious perfume of someone's mother walking ahead of me. Inside, the lights dimmed. One by one, names were called. Applause. Hugs. Proud tears. My classmates filed on and off stage, some in gowns, some in uniforms like mine. A few of them glanced at me with confusion when they saw me seated through my category. Why wasn't I called? I didn't answer with words. Just a tight-lipped smile, like maybe I knew something they didn't. But I didn't. Not yet. Then Jason walked on stage. The crowd roared. His old football coach clapped loudest. The principal shook his hand with both hands like she was touching royalty. And then the speech began. At first, it was the usual self-congratulation lessons from the academy, wisdom from deployment, father's lessons, mother's strength. But then his tone changed. He started talking about people who didn't belong in uniforms, who thought military life was some kind of costume party, who pretended to serve without ever stepping into the fire. And then he looked straight at me. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. He just paused, smiled, and said, "You can't fake commitment. The Corps always knows." The auditorium laughed again. I didn't. I looked around, waiting for anyone to say something, but they all just stared forward, laughing, nodding, moving on. And my parents. My mother's arms were crossed. My father's jaw set in that proud silence he wore like a badge. And that's when the door in the back opened. No one noticed at first, but I did. A man in full marine dress blues stepped inside. Another followed. Then 2 women. Then 3. Their presence wasn't loud, but it was absolute. They moved with calm precision, fanning out silently to the side of the stage. Jason kept speaking until the master sergeant stepped forward. He waited, not asking for permission, just waited. Jason trailed off, visibly confused. Then the master sergeant spoke. Recruit candidate Sierra River silence. Then whispers. Every head in the room turned toward me. I stood slowly. My name, my real name, had never sounded so clear. By order of the Commandant, and under the authority of the United States Marine Corps Recruitment Directive for Exceptional Intelligence Operations, you are hereby offered direct induction into Tier 2 field service. The room gasped. A few teachers blinked like they didn't know whether to clap or question. Jason stammered, "Wait, what you mean her?" I stepped forward, past my brother, past the people who never saw me, past the principal who once told me I was too quiet to lead. And as I reached the stage, the master sergeant saluted. High, sharp, absolute. And I returned it. Have you ever seen a room fall completely, irreversibly silent? It's not like in the movies. No music, no slow zoom, just breath held by everyone but you, because suddenly, they're the ones with nothing to say. And you finally say nothing because your life says everything. I didn't look at Jason again. Not fully. I caught the side of his face, the twitch in his temple, the tightening jaw he inherited from Dad. But I didn't need his reaction. That was the first real moment in my life where I understood power wasn't about domination. It was about gravity. And that stage tilted toward me. The master sergeant handed me the folder, thick, heavy, with a crimson seal embossed at the top. Inside a classified placement offer, a position they don't give to people without blood, grit, and a clearance level that would have made my family shudder had they known. I didn't read it. I already knew. I'd been in communication with them for months. Background checks, simulations, psychological profiling. But I'd told no one, not because I feared rejection, but because silence was my only shield in a family of loud victors. They'd already crowned their champion. They didn't think I was even on the battlefield. So I trained in shadows. I studied at 3 a.m. while they slept. I ran miles before school. Did drills in the backyard when they weren't home. I memorized the NATO phonetic alphabet before I turned 16 and passed language assessments in 2 dialects by 18. I read war theory between violin lessons and internalized field strategy while Jason was busy chasing his 3rd commendation. And I kept smiling at the dinner table, nodding when they praised him, laughing when they compared me to him like it was a favor. But I never asked them to see me. I was building something they'd never understand. So when the applause finally started tentative at first, then rising, I didn't smile out of gratitude. I smiled like a blade being unsheathed. Have you ever felt vindication without rage? That's the difference. Rage still asks for something. Approval. apology, acknowledgement. But this was beyond that. The commandant's personal letter inside the folder was handwritten. He'd seen my code work, my tactical models. He called me a tactician born in silence. He said I understood something most candidates never learn, that some wars are won before a shot is fired, and some soldiers never need to shout to command the field. I had been silent my whole life, but now, my silence was being saluted. The ceremony ended soon after, though I barely heard the final speeches. I stood with the Marine officers as they explained the next steps briefings, relocation, protocols. The weight of my future was suddenly, undeniably real, but it felt like something I'd already lived. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. As the crowd dispersed, I saw Jason trying to get to me. He looked stunned, confused, still stuck in the reality where he was the only soldier in the family. I turned and walked the other way, not to avoid him, but to honor the path I had earned without him. I felt the sharpness of each step down the aisle, felt the eyes on my back, not in ridicule this time, but in recognition. That's when I heard it, my name, not shouted, not whispered. Sierra. I paused. It was my mother. She stood just off the side of the stage, alone, her face unreadable. Sierra, she repeated, stepping forward. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her carefully. Her blouse still perfectly pressed, pearls at her throat, but her voice had a wobble I had never heard before, and I almost answered. I did. But then I remembered. I remembered all the times she'd handed Jason the first plate at dinner, the way she spoke about her son in uniform with glowing pride, and about me, if ever, as the one who'd maybe do admin work someday. I remembered how she never once came to a single ROTC event, how she'd told relatives I was just going through a phase, so I simply said, "You never asked." That landed like a slap in a silent church. She blinked. Her mouth opened, closed. And then she looked at my uniform like it had grown there overnight, like it was something stitched not in fabric, but in defiance. "You should have told us," she murmured again. But her voice lacked weight now. It didn't command. It asked. Behind her, my father stood near the gym doors, arms crossed, jaw tight, staring at the wall, not at me. Still, I waited. For something. Maybe a nod, a twitch of acknowledgement. But he gave nothing. As always. I walked past them both. Do you know what it's like to pass your own parents and feel taller not in height, but in truth? Outside, the sun was setting. The sky a gradient of amber and steel. The master sergeant handed me his card. "We'll be in touch within 72 hours. When you come in, bring nothing. Everything will be issued." I nodded. Understood. He paused. Looked me straight in the eye. "You held the room. Rivers. That's rare." I said nothing. Just held his gaze. Then he saluted again. And this time, I saw my brother watching from behind the glass door. Still on stage. Still holding his speech notes like they meant anything now. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. Because power doesn't gloat. It just moves. At home that night, I didn't go straight to my room. I went to the garage, to the dusty corner where Dad kept his old footlocker from his brief ROTC stint before he dropped out. He'd always told Jason not to open it, said it held military memories, though I doubted he'd ever earned much. But I wasn't there to open it. I just stood in front of it and whispered, "I didn't need your legacy. I made my own." Then I walked upstairs, packed a single duffel bag, and waited. No one knocked. No one said a word. Not until morning, when the black SUV rolled into the driveway. Unmarked. Engine silent. The recruiter stepped out. No smile. Just precision. "You ready?" I didn't look back. Not even once. Because sometimes the door you walk through is the one your family swore you'd never reach. And walking through it without needing to slam it is the loudest victory of all. The door closed behind me with a soft click. That was it. No ceremony, no hug goodbye, no rushed steps down the stairs. My mother didn't open her bedroom door. My father didn't lean against the railing. Jason didn't run to the driveway. The same silence they'd used to erase me, they wielded again. But this time, I didn't flinch. Because silence doesn't cut the same when you've sharpened it into armor. The SUV smelled like leather, steel, and a trace of wintergreen. The driver didn't speak. We turned out of the cul-de-sac and into the early morning mist, and with each streetlight we passed, I felt the old version of me peeling off in layers, the one who tiptoed, the one who apologized, the one who waited to be invited. I wasn't waiting anymore. We crossed the bridge near the county line. I'd walked that bridge once as a child, tracing my fingers along the guardrail, wondering what lay beyond the bend where the trees thickened and the signs began to say things like, "Authorized personnel only." I used to dream that beyond those signs lived a version of me I didn't have to explain to anyone. Now I was headed there. 3 hours later, we arrived at a building that didn't exist on any GPS, a fortress of concrete and silence. No name on the gate. Just a retinal scanner and the soft hiss of hydraulics unlocking something unseen. The recruiter finally spoke. "From this point forward, you do not speak unless instructed." I nodded. We moved through corridors colder than winter's stone. Every door had no window. Every face we passed was unreadable. But I felt something strange. Not fear. Familiarity. Like this place had been waiting for me. We entered a room with no chairs, only a long table and 2 binders. A woman in uniform already stood at the end. Her posture so still it felt carved. Her ribbons were few, but they were black tier, covert, the kind they don't teach you about. She didn't introduce herself, just said, "Candidate Rivers, you've been approved for direct insertion into Tier 2 operational intelligence, effective immediately." She slid one binder forward. "This contains your formal acceptance. Sign on page 6. The second binder contains your training directives. You'll memorize and burn it. Do you understand, yes, ma'am?" She watched me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, "You come highly recommended. Your record's clean. Your psych evaluations are cold. That's rare." I held her gaze, said nothing. She leaned slightly forward. "Cold isn't bad. Cold survives." And for the first time since the ceremony, I felt something stir. Not warmth, but clarity. That here, in this world, I wasn't too quiet. I wasn't too still. I was exactly calibrated. She stepped back. Dismissed. I signed, took the binders, memorized every page. Page 6 of the second binder had a single sentence. "She who speaks too soon dies unheard." I didn't sleep that first night. The dorms were individual, windowless, silent. But the silence wasn't cruel. It was clean. I lay there staring at the ceiling, rehearsing every field term I knew, every code sequence, every exit protocol. And underneath it all, I thought of Jason, not with anger, with precision. He had mocked me on stage, but the Marines had called my name, not because I was loud, not because I chased glory, but because I had built something no one could see, and that's exactly why they wanted me. Visibility is a weakness. They said in orientation, emotional confirmation is a liability. Every civilian wants to be seen. Every soldier must learn how to disappear. It wasn't just intel they taught us. It was invisibility as weapon. The weeks blurred. Training modules, scenario tests, surveillance drills, language immersion. My scores were quiet, but exact. I passed silently, consistently. They began calling me Echo, not because I mimicked, but because I always returned even when they thought I'd vanished. But something happened during our third infiltration simulation, a scenario where we were to penetrate a mock diplomatic compound without detection, extract a package, and exfil within 60 minutes. 2 male candidates tried to take command, loud, assertive, strategic on paper. They failed. I waited, watched, and then moved precisely, silently, weaving through the simulated embassy like I had already lived it. No unnecessary steps, no commands barked, just results. I retrieved the package in under 32 minutes. When I returned, the instructors didn't clap, didn't nod. One of them, an older man with frostbitten hands, simply said, "There's always one shadow that moves different. You're it." And I remembered the auditorium, the laughter, Jason's smirk, the silence. I had moved through it, not around it. They told us during psych debrief some agents burn out because they need applause. You'd rather be the whisper that changes everything. Weeks passed, then months. By now, I was stationed in a forward domestic operations post still training, but given access to real-time field monitoring, I could read the movements of senators before the public ever saw them. I could trace phone patterns across oceans, and still I told no one. No family check-ins, no letters, only the mission. Until the day I received an internal alert, Tier 1 Honor Commendation Ceremony. Nominations open, internal personnel only. I hesitated, then submitted one name, mine, with a single sentence attached. She stood while others spoke. I thought nothing of it, until 3 weeks later, when my name appeared on the official bulletin board. Recipient Echo Rivers, S. Honor Award for Silent Distinction in Intelligence Preparedness and Simulated Command. It would be presented in D.C. public ceremony. Mixed presence civilian and military. The same stage Jason had once spoken on. Now rebuilt, expanded, and renamed the Unified Service Recognition Hall. They were inviting families this time, for the first time. I added 2 names to the guest list, Jason Rivers and Margaret Rivers. No explanation, just names. And then I waited. The day of the ceremony came like a slow breath through steel lungs. I wore full dress uniform, custom, minimal ribbons, except for the black tier bar they said didn't exist. I stepped backstage and waited behind the curtain. I could hear the crowd, chatter, footsteps, the occasional awkward laugh. Then I heard it, my mother's voice, tight, controlled. "Why are we here again? What is this?" And Jason's reply, "She's being recognized. That's all I know." My name echoed through the auditorium next, the announcer's voice sharp, military-toned. I stepped onto the stage. And there, in the second row, Jason, in a civilian blazer. My mother, in pearls again. Same crossed arms, same skeptical stare, until she saw the men behind me, medaled, ranked, standing at attention, until she saw them salute me. The salutes landed like thunderclaps in a church. Crisp. Absolute. No room for misunderstanding. One after another. They raised their hands to their brows, a formation of generals, commanders, intel chiefs. The same men and women my mother had seen in history books, on news panels, in the dark corners of power where civilians aren't invited. And now they were saluting her daughter. I didn't look at her yet. Instead, I took the podium. Not to speak. The protocol was clear: recipients did not address the audience. But I stood for the full 10 seconds of ceremony pause, where the silence was part of the ritual, where the room had to look and reckon. And they did. Dozens of decorated officers, 100 civilian leaders. The public attendees who had no idea what my commendation was for, only that it existed in a tier above classification. No one asked questions, because the presence of those behind me answered all of them. The master of ceremonies stepped forward again, voice steady, echo, operative distinction, awarded for covert excellence, exceptional scenario command, and psychological field clarity. This commendation does not include detail, but it is earned, not gifted. And it is permanent. He turned to me. Rivers. I stepped forward. He extended the box. Small, velvet black. I opened it and found a single silver insignia circular, with a cut across the middle, symbolizing not a rank, but a presence that cleaves. I held it, then pinned it to my uniform. The hall stood in silence. No one clapped. That's the difference between honor and applause. One needs no echo. I walked down the stairs and into the aisle. And now, I looked at them. My mother's hands were folded over her clutch, knuckles white. Jason's brow furrowed not in contempt, but confusion, as if he was trying to recalibrate the map he used to navigate the world, and I no longer existed on it. I met his eyes. He looked away. Good. I took my seat in the front row, next to a female officer with 4 stars and eyes sharper than polished steel. She nodded at me. Once, without words. And for the first time, I felt it in my bones that I belonged not just here, but above it. The ceremony continued. Names I didn't recognize. Applause resumed for the others. I listened. I nodded. But my mind was no longer in the room. It had moved ahead months, years, deployments, operations. The life they never saw coming. After the final recipient was called, the lights brightened. People began to stand, shake hands, filter into the reception space. I remained seated, and that's when Jason approached. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, behind the row, hesitant. I didn't know. He said finally. I turned slightly, looked up. No. I said quietly. You didn't want to know. He opened his mouth, closed it. You think I mocked you because I hated you, he said after a pause. But I didn't. I just never thought you were serious. That's the problem, I replied. You thought the game was yours by default. He looked down at the insignia on my chest. What does it mean, he asked. I met his eyes again. It means I never needed to prove anything to you. He swallowed hard. You're different now. No, I said. I'm just visible now. He nodded slowly. I guess. I just didn't know you were in the running. I stood, face to face with him now. That's because you never saw me as a contender. And for the first time, Jason didn't have a comeback. No grin, no charm. Just a man standing in the shadow of a truth he couldn't reshape. My mother stepped up beside him, still silent. She looked at the generals walking past, the other officers nodding at me, the way they deferred, just slightly, the way they acknowledged. Then she looked at me, truly looked. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't think this world was yours. I breathed in, measured, waited. It was never your world to assign. Her lips parted, as if to apologize, as if to ask for forgiveness. But I stepped past her, because some wounds aren't meant to be re-explained, only outgrown. At the reception, I stood near the back, the refreshment table, untouched. I never liked crowds, and I didn't need small talk. My work didn't require being liked, only being irreplaceable. A young girl, 15, maybe 16, approached. ROTC uniform, wide eyes. Ma'am, she asked, voice trembling. Yes. She looked like she wanted to cry and smile at once. You don't know me, But I followed your training scores on the dark feed. I thought they were a myth. They're not. She nodded, eyes shining. Thank you, she said. For what? For proving that quiet doesn't mean weak. And in that moment, I felt something shift, not in me, but in her. A new pattern, a new trajectory, one I had unknowingly carved. Keep walking, I told her, even when they pretend you're invisible. She nodded again and melted back into the crowd. That night, I walked through the halls of the Pentagon Annex alone. My boots echoed against marble. Every step reminded me of where I'd been and where I was going. My name would never be in lights, but it was in every briefing that mattered. That's the thing they never understood when you move in silence long enough. You become the map others follow, even if they never know your name. My mother sent a message the next day. No subject line. Just, I'm proud. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her, but because I no longer needed her to say it. Respect that has to be earned twice was never respect to begin with. My brother sent a photo of his old medal with the caption, "Doesn't feel as heavy anymore." I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. Weight is only real if you carried it yourself. And I had the silence, the jokes, the being left off every list I had held them, and I had turned them into steel. So now, when I walk into a room, I don't look for my family. I look for threat vectors. I look for allies. I look for exit points. But mostly, I look for the young woman I used to be scared, small, unseen. And I nod to her. You made it. You did it. Without their applause, without their help, without their eyes on you. And now the world will never be able to look away again. The next assignment came without ceremony. Just a sealed envelope delivered by internal courier. No return address, no briefing room, no names. I opened it at my desk, a dimly lit corner in Sublevel 3 of the Intel Command Center. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed faintly, almost like a breath held too long. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, precise. Tier Black. Cross-border extraction. Operator Echo approved for lead. Aero 600 wheels up. Clearance Eclipse. Eclipse. A code rarely issued. Operatives who received it were whispered about. Not introduced. It meant full discretionary authority and full deniability. It meant that if I succeeded, no one would know. And if I failed, no one would look. I folded the paper carefully, burned it in the terminal furnace, and walked out without a word. At 0600, the jet was already on the tarmac. Matte black. Markings erased. Inside, 2 agents nodded. No introductions. Just gear, dossiers, and silence. One handed me a tablet. Target asset trapped in failed transfer. Coordinates on screen. Enemy presence confirmed. Civilian density high. Collateral tolerance 0. I read the dossier twice, then closed the tablet. Call sign Graythorn. Objective retrieve. Silence. Return. I nodded, and we flew. 12 hours later. I was standing on a rooftop in a foreign city, boots planted against rusted steel, heartbeat matching the hum of the drone overhead. The target was below 2 floors down, trapped in a diplomatic safe house that had turned into a cage. Enemy agents circled, civilian presence in every adjacent building. It wasn't the kind of mission you win by force. It was the kind of mission you win by being invisible. I slipped into the stairwell without making a sound. The breathing techniques they teach in Tier Black training aren't for panic. They're for vanishing heart rate slowed, motion dissolved. You become the space between seconds. In 32 minutes, the target was extracted. No shots fired, no words spoken. We disappeared like fog. Mission time 1 hour, 19 minutes. Back in DC. The debrief lasted less than 10. I handed in the remaining files, signed the non-disclosures, and declined the medal they quietly offered. Because medals are for stories, and this life, my life, is lived beneath them. A week later, I was called to a secure room, not underground, but high top floor of the west wing of the defense complex. A room only few had entered, and even fewer had walked out of with a name intact. Inside, a civilian man waited, suit, graying temples, eyes that didn't blink. Sierra Rivers, he said, not Echo. My real name. Yes, you've been requested. By whom? He slid forward a folder, red stamped. I opened it. Inside my file, but updated, reclassified, redacted in sections I had never seen before, even to me, and a note at the bottom. Candidate Rivers approved for strategic liaison to the Joint Intelligence Oversight Panel, civilian military integration, direct presidential oversight, immediate effect. I looked at him. He nodded. They want you in the room now, not the shadows. I didn't answer right away, because the weight of that sentence wasn't about opportunity. It was about exposure. Power isn't just what you gain, it's what you risk when they finally see you. I thought of my family again. Jason, the ceremony, the silence that once surrounded me like a fog. And now I was being asked to walk into the kind of room where decisions were made that would never see daylight. I said yes. But before I left, I asked the man one question. Why now? He looked at me with something between respect and calculation, because they finally realized the quiet ones were always leading. The next morning, I was escorted to a room with 7 seats. Only 5 were filled. A general, a senator, a woman from Cyber Command, a civilian advisor, and me. They didn't look surprised to see me. One of them spoke Rivers. We've read your simulations, your extractions, your psychological models. We've seen what you do with silence. He pushed forward a folder marked Crimson Wave. Inside were photographs of upcoming operations. None had been greenlit yet. All were high risk, high diplomacy. He tapped the center image. This one's yours. I nodded, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I went home, not to visit, but to stand. On my terms. The door opened slowly. Jason answered. Older now, less polished. Sierra, he asked, blinking. I'm not staying, I said. I just needed to see it. See what I looked past him to the kitchen table where we used to sit. The same one where they passed over me for years, where they bragged about his medals, his deployments, his speeches. It never changed. I said softly. He looked down. No, they didn't. They won't. I said. But I did. He stepped aside, unsure whether to invite me in. I didn't walk through. Instead, I handed him something. A plain white envelope, no return address. Inside a single photo. Me, at the ceremony. Saluted. Insignia visible. Below the photo. In my handwriting, it was never about being seen. It was about being undeniable. He held it like it weighed more than any medal he'd ever earned. I turned and walked away. That night, I returned to my quarters and sat in silence. But it was a different silence now. Not the cold absence of being ignored, but the powerful quiet of a woman no longer asking to be heard. I poured a glass of water, laid the next mission file on the table, and looked up at my own reflection not in a mirror, but in the window glass, blackened by the night. A uniform, a face calm as steel, eyes that had seen erasure and chosen, over and over again, not revenge, but excellence. And when the call came, another code black op, another operation requiring a ghost who had already walked through fire, I said yes. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I finally understood. They never saw me coming. And now, they never moved without me. The final operation wasn't called a mission, it was called a transition. The language was delicate, civilian-friendly, politically silent. But the files spoke for themselves. There was no war declared, no troops deployed, just a shifting of borders, a redrawing of influence, a recalibration of silence. And I was chosen to oversee it. They told me in a classified room beneath the Eisenhower building. Fluorescent lights, steel chairs, and a colonel who didn't bother with pleasantries. "Rivers," he said, handing me a folder. "You're not the ghost anymore. You're the hand." Inside a series of operations marked with 5 seals, each page labeled with strategic uncertainty, not because we didn't know what would happen, but because we couldn't afford to say it out loud. I reviewed the files in silence. They didn't need a response, just a signature. I signed. 3 days later, I was flown to a base that didn't have a name, just coordinates etched into concrete. Arctic wind tore across the tarmac as I stepped off the transport, wind slicing across my cheekbones. No welcoming party, just a single escort. He said nothing as we moved through reinforced doors and sub-level corridors, each checkpoint tighter than the last. At the end was a room with 4 people already waiting. One was from State, one from Cyber Command, one from NATO, and the last the President's personal liaison. They turned to me without ceremony. "Commander Rivers." The liaison said, "You are here to oversee the silent rebalancing of the theater. There will be no parades, no news stories, no names." I nodded. "This isn't about taking credit," I said. "It's about keeping the world from tipping." She slid a small black box across the table. "Then this belongs to you." I opened it. Inside a single insignia. Black. No markings. No rank. Just presence. Tier 0 clearance. Operational status above command. In that moment, everything fell silent. Even the hum of the walls. This was the threshold no one spoke about. The place beyond ranks and uniforms. The level where decisions are made without signatures, where orders don't echo, they just happen. And I had entered it. That night, I returned to quarters that looked more like a vault than a room. No windows, just a single cot, a desk, and a surveillance monitor that showed no footage, only raw data feeds. As I sat down, a message appeared on the encrypted line: "Operation Ravenglass initiated. Protocol 99, response required." I knew what it meant. No contact, no trace, no exit until completion. And I said yes. Not because I wanted glory, but because I understood that silence had become the most powerful sound in the world and I had mastered its language. Before deploying, I submitted one final request. A ceremonial one. They called it optional. I requested that my uniform be adjusted. I asked for a nameplate. Not Echo, not Commander, just Rivers. Nothing more. Because names matter when they've been erased once. We landed in neutral territory under the cover of an Arctic front. Visibility 0. Satellite coverage blocked. Only we knew we were there, and only I knew what I was truly there to do. The others looked to me. No briefings, no commands. Just a glance. They moved. Because sometimes, the real leaders don't raise their voices. They just raise the room. We moved silently through the night. No gunfire, no detonation. The enemy never saw us. Because we were never where they thought we'd be. In 23 hours, the objective was complete. Stabilization achieved. Intelligence secured. Threat neutralized. We returned without casualties. But something had shifted. When I stepped off the transport, the tarmac was no longer empty. Someone was waiting. Not a superior, not an officer, but Jason. He stood alone, dressed in a civilian coat, hands stiff at his sides. How he got there, I didn't ask. I assumed someone called him. Or maybe he had followed the shadows for long enough to finally see where they led. I stopped a few paces from him. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. He looked at me like he was seeing something he couldn't name. "I had to see it," he replied. "I had to know." I raised an eyebrow. Know what he swallowed. His voice cracked. "Just slightly. That you weren't following me all those years. You were building something I never even saw." I didn't answer. Because I didn't need his confession. But still. He offered it. "I mocked you because I thought you were trying to be me. But you weren't. You were already beyond me." I looked down at my boots. Still damp from snow. Still bearing the weight of things I would never explain. "You mocked me because it was easier than admitting I didn't need you." He flinched. Then he nodded. And in that moment, for the first time, I saw him not as my rival, not as the family's golden son, but as a man who had been built by praise and had never known what to do without it. "You don't need to forgive me," he said. "I won't," I replied. He laughed once, soft, hollow. Then he stepped back. "I won't try to explain anymore," he said. "But if you ever let me, I'd like to listen." And that was enough. He left, and I turned toward the building. Inside, the ceremony was about to begin. A private one. No cameras, no audience. Just the Secretary of Defense, waiting with a single document. He stood when I entered. No smile, no speech. Just the truth. "Commander Rivers, you've been appointed Strategic Director of Classified Global Operations. Effective immediately. Presidential mandate. No confirmation hearing. No trail." He slid the document forward. I signed. He handed me one final envelope, inside a handwritten note. From the President. "You did it the hard way. The right way. History may never say your name, but we will never forget it." I folded the paper, slipped it into my jacket, and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising. A new day. But not for me. For the world. Because some of us don't rise with the sun. We become the light before it. And I stood there, no applause, no family, no audience. Just the calm power of a woman who no longer needed to be understood. Because she had been chosen by silence, by precision, by excellence. And in the end, I didn't need them to respect me. The whole room already did.